A bad battery is the biggest concern with refurbished phones. They can be tricky to identify, but will irritate you every day you use them. So these are all the refurbished iPhones, the 6S through the 15, and today we're going to test them, starting now. Beginning with some classic YouTube, and as we hit play we'll break down exactly what we've got here, because we have some very interesting and varied characters which give us the full spectrum of the refurbished battery experience. And I want to keep an extra close eye on these guys, the ones with new replaced batteries, because I'm a little worried. Quickly, phone by phone introductions. I've arranged them in 2 rows from this 6S all the way back from 2015, a 9-year-old phone, to this 15 Plus, last year's iPhone, and the latest refurbished option. After the 6S, this is the SE First Edition, a budget iPhone released in 2016. The 7 came out later in the same year. The 8 Plus, our first larger model with its larger battery, from 2017. Next, the X, released at the same time as the 8 line, but looking like it's from a different era entirely. The XS Max, the future now available in a bigger size, part of Apple's 2018 offerings, continued in the XR, a cheaper option released alongside. In 2019 was the first appearance of a Pro model, represented here in its most expensive and grander form, the 11 Pro Max. A little underwhelming now, the SE Second Edition, Apple's budget option from early 2020. Next is the first iPhone mini, but miniaturization may not be the best strategy when it comes to battery, 2021. But there should be some serious battery improvement here with the 13 Pro from 2022. The SE Third Edition, our final budget iPhone, looking terribly dated considering its 2022 release. On to 2023 with the 14 Plus. Big phone, expect big things. And finally the 15 Plus, even newer, could be our battery champion. However, all of that only gives you an incredibly rough guide on how they'll perform, because as these are refurbished phones, there are 2 important categories: the phones with brand new replaced batteries and those with used, old ones. Now, iPhones actually tell you their battery health, which of course isn't how charged they are, it's what percentage of their original battery capacity they can still hold. Naturally, on used phones, this is nearly always going to be under 100%. Some, like this 8 Plus, came with significantly degraded battery health, just 82%, barely above the minimum 80% promised by all the refurbished websites. It's a bit too low a bar in my opinion, but that's a whole topic in its own right. I'll list all the battery healths above the phones now. Having just a little trouble with my poor internet, which I guess unsurprisingly ain't too keen on 14 simultaneous streams. Now, with these used iPhones, those to keep an eye out for are some of these really old models, because they tend to develop very poor battery life at their age. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're the first ones to go. In fact, as we cross the 1-hour mark, most of the phones haven't moved by too much. This 15 Plus is claiming a slightly hard to believe 99% still. But on the very far end, this 6S is really getting quite worryingly hot, and he's all the way down to 63%. Let's start a game. Crossy Road, a chicken looking for answers. On the opposite side of the spectrum from these old phones with heavily used batteries are the ones with brand new batteries, with full 100% battery health, including all of those which I bought in excellent condition from each of the different refurbished websites, which is impressive because it's actually not promised as part of excellent condition. I'm especially curious how good these batteries are, because counterintuitively, a full battery health phone is almost more scary than a used one. They've swapped the battery, but you don't know if they've put a good or bad quality one inside. A real danger. There are a couple of particularly interesting phones to highlight among these 100% battery health ones, including this 11 Pro Max, which despite buying in the lowest condition from back market, I paid extra for the option to have the battery replaced with a new one, so I'm very curious about its quality. And this SE Second Edition is, well, a little concerning too, because it doesn't have an original battery in it. I know, because it gives us this non-genuine part warning. Lastly, and I feel I have to mention this, is the 15, which I'm including in new. Isn't really, it's just barely used. Despite being sold to me in the lowest condition, on account of quite serious scratching to the screen, it still has 100% battery health and just 35-ish cycle counts on the battery. Oof. Just over 15 odd minutes of gaming, and this 6S has plummeted even faster. It's awful. It's at just 13% now, and the SE is not quite as bad, but at just 46%, really not good. Let's quickly switch to stack before it dies completely. It's probably worth highlighting that besides age being a major factor for the batteries, raw size obviously is too, and over the years Apple has gradually started putting larger and larger batteries in their phones, and not just the massive pluses, even the regular and Pro models. Conversely, our second phone, the SE First Edition, has the smallest battery on the table. So while it may score high in cuteness factor, it's fast catching up to the 6S. In fact, they're both all the way down on 1% now. When did that happen? Speaking of the 6S, he went down so fast, and he's got really hot. I'm starting to wonder if he's developed a battery fault. Let's take a peek on my thermal camera. Yes, they are all a bit warm, but he's the hottest at an uncomfortable 42-ish degrees, a little concerning. Great game this, I'm really enjoying playing it on 14 phones at once. It is freezing up a bit on some of the oldest phones though, which really does mess with my timing. I know, excuses. Strangely, these two have now sat on 1% for quite a bit without dying completely. I is much confuddled. Any ideas? And this 7 has really had a fall from grace. I thought it was doing quite well for its age before, but now it's suddenly down on 30%. And on the other end, there are some clear pack leaders emerging. There are just 3 still above 80%, with just this 15 still boasting 90. Psh! As we switch to TikTok, I should mention that there are other factors in play. A big one is the different types of displays the phones have. The early models here up to the XR use older LCD technology, which generally burn more power, but on the other hand, the new ones with AMOLED displays can get far, far brighter, which can itself draw more power, but at least does have the upside of allowing you to see your phone screen when it's bright outside. And when I say can be a factor, I mean it shouldn't be a factor in this test, as I have attempted to set all the brightnesses the same. And there are other settings I've set to try and make the test more fair, but which have the downside of making this test a little bit less real usage accurate. Mainly, I've put them all in airplane mode with the Wi-Fi on, because I don't have phone plans for all of them, and some of them seem to do a lot more searching for networks than the others, so keep in mind that this is very much a beyond best case scenario for most of them, at least for constant usage. Now both of these are still going, really doing quite surprisingly well on their 1% battery health, this one for more than an hour. Okay, it's finally dead. Our first casualty at 2 hours 56 minutes. Just under 3 hours. That's not so bad. Well, I mean, it's absolutely terrible, but it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be when it hit 1%. The other older ones are all getting a bit low now as we move on from TikTok. The 7 is down to just 11%, the 8 just 29. I really thought the 8 being larger would do a bit better. A little surprised the X is under 50% too, even with its new battery. Now onto some video recording, which can be pretty taxing energy-wise, and also for the phones. Let's start with some 1080p selfie video. Finally, after being on 1% for 50 odd minutes, the SE has gone 2 now. Very strange behaviour. It lasted 3 hours 45 minutes in total. Okay, the 7 has followed it up at 4 hours 12 minutes, but it's drained in a much more normal manner. This still really isn't enough for daily use if you use your phone a reasonable amount, but it was so cheap when I bought it that maybe as a backup phone. 2 more scalps for 45 minutes 1080p video, not bad. Besides the 8 Plus, the newer SEs are really showing their weakness too now. The 2nd gen SE is down to 33%, maybe expected, but this latest one, the 3rd edition, is suddenly down to 40%. But at the far end, the most recent phones are still only a little under 3/4 full, at 73 and 71% after almost 4.5 hours of constant work. This is going to be a lot longer than I'd expected. Let's see the damage some 4K recording can do. We'll have to use the back cameras because they can't all do 4K on their front cameras. So this is going to be some really scintillating footage as they record my table. Now 4K video recording is really quite demanding, so I can't say I'm amazed it's finished off the old 8 Plus at 4 hours 52 minutes, but I really was expecting a Plus to do a bit better overall. Its battery is just that much bigger than the regular sized iPhone batteries. I guess that's what an 82% battery health gives you. I didn't realise the battery health was that important. We're learning new things here, folks. Past the 5-hour mark now and onto Instagram. Let's do some vertical video now, for real. Haha. Okay, this X is really not doing very well. It's down to 10% now, which seems a bit fast for a new battery, no? And just over 10 minutes later, it dead. That last 10% disappeared suspiciously fast. It's lasted 5 hours 20 minutes, which is fairly underwhelming, but I've just looked it up and it would seem that the X's never had great batteries, so I don't really know what to think now. And after just another 20 odd minutes, at 5 hours 38 minutes, our SE second edition is down. Now, don't forget this is the one with a generic battery, and honestly, despite that, I don't think it's done too bad. Still not going to be good enough for heavy daily usage, but you can get these for such a good price. I paid just 78 quid, so as a cheap backup iPhone, it's ideal. Insta is really snatching souls. At 6 hours 2 minutes, our third edition SE follows his sibling. But at 2.5 times the cost, I think this is a very dubious value proposition. I really don't think it makes much sense for anyone now. It's far too expensive, even refurbished. In other news, the 13 Pro is not doing as well as I'd expected, especially compared to the 11 Pro Max, although that does have a new battery. Speaking of new batteries, the XR and XS Max are getting a bit lower despite theirs. And our 12 Mini is super low too now, at just 3%, as we switch to a slightly different sort of test, the flashlight or torch. Now, I regularly use my torch for a few minutes, and I've often wondered how drastically it drains the battery. So while it's a bit hard to see, because the flashlights are on the bottom of the phones, they're all on now. And unsurprisingly, at 6 hours 27 minutes, the 12 Mini goes down, but not before doing some 15 minutes of flashlight on that 3%, to be fair. The 12 Mini has always had a weak battery as a little bit of an Achilles heel, so while this isn't quite as bad as I was afraid it was going to be, it would still be a little bit hard to recommend this. Onto some more demanding gaming, a 3D endless runner. The XR was really weird. It got the 20% low battery warning and then died about 2 minutes later at 6 hours 49 minutes. Sort of half came back on and flashed a red Apple logo for an instant before dying. I don't know what that means. If you do know, please enlighten me. Meanwhile, the XS Max also behaved oddly, dying at 6 hours 56 minutes, still with 13%, literally as I was trying to turn the XR back on, mainly because I'm curious if it was due to overheating because of the game. But while I did get it to come back on briefly, they didn't feel particularly hot to the touch. And the XR now read at just 10% and then went off after just a few minutes. The XS Max wouldn't stay on at all. Maybe they just don't like YouTube Shorts, which is what I'm putting them through next. Another possibility, besides the new batteries not being properly calibrated yet, is they could actually be old batteries which have been boosted, which is where refurbishers edit the information on the battery's chips so that it reads to the phone as having 100% battery health, even when it's not true and they haven't replaced the battery at all. And we've just been sold a dodgy phone. Though, truth be told, their results weren't dismal at just under 7 hours. Sure, my test is a little bit of an unrealistic best case scenario due to the whole airplane mode and slightly moderate screen brightness, but they've outlasted some other battery tests I've compared them to, featuring the same models of course. So despite their strange behaviour, they may be all legit. On to a bit more gaming, really getting a bit tired now. It turns out my battery life ain't too great, but the 14 and 15 are only now finally reading at under the 50% mark at 47 and 42% respectively, with the 11 Pro Max putting in really quite an impressive showing, still on 32% itself, and the 13 Pro really trailing at a meagre 12. Finally, as this has gone on far longer than I'd expected, I'd been working on this for like 12 hours already and I'd only started late. And it was like 6 in the morning and I really needed to go to sleep. So I put them back on good old crossy roads again and left the camera running to record the end of the test. The 13 Pro expectedly became an X iPhone just a little while later at 8 hours 56 minutes. The 13 line had very good battery life in general, but this one was somewhat a victim of its lower battery health at only 84%. Also worth noting though is that the 13 Pro is the only phone on the table that has an 120Hz screen. The higher refresh rate may be better for using it, but it will be worse for the battery life, so it does have a little bit of an excuse to fall back on. Unfortunately, me falling asleep had the result of allowing the 11 Pro Max to keep its low battery message up, which paused the game and partially preserved its battery, and sometime later the 14 Plus did the same. For whatever reason, the 15 Plus didn't get these low battery warnings at all, continued playing the game, and therefore, despite leading the test throughout, died before the other two at 13 hours and 32 minutes. A very impressive result. As an incredibly rough guess, I reckon the 11, if it had kept playing the game, should have lasted till about 11 hours 15 minutes, and the 14 Plus about 12.5 hours. In practice, they expired at 13 hours 44 minutes for the 11 and 14 hours 27 for the 14 Plus. Regardless of inaccuracy, these last three are all very, very impressive results. I'm especially impressed with the 11 Pro Max. It seems that they did use a very good quality battery in there. Here are all their final times on screen now. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.